All right, well, good evening, everyone. I am Jessica Grant. I am the interim Public Works Downtown Manager. I wanted to start off with letting you know that this presentation is also being translated in Spanish by my colleague Norma Cervantes, and you can click on the interpretation button if you want to hear the presentation in Spanish. Esta presentación está siendo transmitida al español y puede hacer clic en el botón interpretación. Gracias. Also participating in tonight's webinar is Derek Bailey, the city's traffic engineer, and Chelsea Swanson, the supervising transportation manager, will be moderating. Tonight, we will be discussing the Milpas Street pedestrian safety enhancements. The purpose of tonight's webinar is we're going to give you a background on the Milpas corridor planning effort, how this effort relates to the active transportation program, review conceptual plans, as well as review the project costs for improvements along Milpas Street, and as well as what next steps are to obtaining funding for the improvements and how to continue to stay involved in this planning effort. And then we will take any questions or comments, feedback at the end. Before we get started on the background, we had a couple questions for you, and I wanted to start off with the first poll. And the first question is, if you've participated in the Milpas corridor planning effort back in 2019 and 2020, we had workshops at the Franklin Community Center. We also had feedback that Eastside residents had given us via email or survey. So go ahead and click yes or no for that question. And also we wanted to know about how you heard about tonight's webinar, whether it was the city news and brief, a next door post, email from city staff, or signage that you saw in the neighborhood. And go ahead and click your response. Great. Thank you for that. It looks like that most of you had participated in the planning effort, and then it looks like the various touch points that we had with the neighborhood that you heard about this meeting through several sources. So that was great to hear. So for this, I want to go into the background, and so some of it will be a refresher for some. And for those that are new, we'll go ahead and explain what this effort is all about. So to begin, there's a maintenance effort plan for Milpas Street, and it's about a couple years away now. Preliminary evaluations have identified the need to do a grind and overlay of the pavement, and to replace the corner ramps with ADA accessible or with the American with Disabilities Act for compliant ramps at the intersection corners, repair traffic signals, and continue ongoing repairs to the sidewalks, curbs, gutters that have been damaged by the street trees along the corridor. As part of the planning effort, for this major maintenance effort, staff performed a Vision Zero analysis to identify safety improvements. Milpas Street is identified in the council adopted Vision Zero strategy because Milpas has a high amount of repeating pattern of traffic collisions that have resulted in serious or fatal injuries. Due to the importance of Milpas Street, the Public Works Department initiated an outreach effort back in October of 2019 to discuss Vision Zero safety improvements and identify other potential community changes to Milpas Street. The outreach effort also helps position the city for grant funding through the active transportation program for community identified improvements that are above and beyond just the basic maintenance along the corridor. So in October, we had the first workshop. It was a listening workshop to discover community desires and needs for the future of Milpas Street. We also had a supplemental survey as well. And then in January of 2020, we returned back to the community with proposed addresses to address, proposed approaches to address community concerns. The proposed approaches that received community support at the approach workshop focused on pedestrian safety enhancements such as safer crossings, enhanced street lighting at intersections, and tree management and sidewalk widening. In April 2020, we presented what we heard from the community and the suggested approaches, and City Council did agree with those, and they directed staff to apply for an active transportation program grant that we did back in 2020. So the next few slides will cover the approach from 2020 that was community supported. It basically involved improving the pedestrian environment and space by reconfiguring the sidewalks and the tree wells, and also to improve pedestrian safety at intersections, and really that those all being a synergy with the upcoming maintenance project. The project or the photo that's shown on the right and the left on this slide shows how narrow the existing sidewalk can be along Milpas, and also the issue of uplifted sidewalk due to the mature trees that are along the corridor. The photo shown in the middle on this slide just indicates how the experience can be when crossing Milpas Street. The photo that's shown here shows the existing conditions and site constraints while walking, driving, and parking along Milpas. And again, just at this specific photo here, right next to the donut shop, their sidewalk is narrow as 3.5 feet. On approximately the width of some of the other parts of the sidewalk is 8 feet. And then we have followed by a fairly narrow parking lane, and then the vehicular lane's about 10 feet. This is an example of what we submitted for the active transportation grant back in 2020. And the basic concept, and I'll show the slide that's following this that provides the concept, but in general, this is what other communities have done to make space for the mature trees, is to allow basically curb alignments here to, again, have more space for the trees, and then more walking area for the residents. And what we also heard was the importance to still maintain on-street parking. And so again, this is the concept that we put forth in the 2020 application. So a specific example, we don't have the entire corridor, but just a snapshot of a block along Milpas between Mason and Yanonali Street. Just shows in the red is the realigned curb, again, to make more space for the existing mature trees. And then in behind, the sidewalks would be widened. And then these were sort of the parking pocket concept. Each intersection would also have improvements for lighting. In orange are the existing lights, but we also proposed additional street lighting at the other corners of the intersection. So all legs of the intersection would be well lit. For a project of this size and scope, we had to seek grant funding from the Active Transportation Project or program. And this is a source that can help fund the higher dollar projects. And it's an extremely competitive program. The state releases approximately 450 million statewide every couple of years. And as we've seen through the cycles, which started in 2014 for this program, each cycle becomes more and more competitive. So in 2020, we submitted 4 grant applications and we received funding for only 1. Unfortunately, we did not score well on the Milpas application. The cutoff was 90 points. We received 80 points for the Milpas application. When we met with the state a couple times to review the scoring for this application, and again, it takes a couple of meetings with them. The grant rubrics for this grant application are very detailed and specific. And what we heard from the state is that the project was not transformative enough based upon the project costs. And I'm not sure if you caught in the earlier slide, but the cost for these improvements along the Milpas corridor was approximately $27 million. So the state's advice for us as a city was to look at rescoping the project where we would not be judged on the transformative rubric. And it would be considered, it would go from a larger project to a medium-sized project. And in funding terms for that program is approximately $10 million that it would need to be reduced to. And really what, nothing about the project was necessarily bad. It was all good, but the state said really focus on the intersection safety and comfort in the bus stops to improve the transit comfort along this very busy corridor. And so your feedback for tonight, we really want to hear from you about this rescope. For the upcoming maintenance project, again, what we could do within our normal pavement maintenance budget would be to, again, focus on high visibility and crosswalks, better quality pavement markings, sidewalk repairs, and ADA improvements as well. And what we think, again, that would be a good scope for this upcoming grant cycle, which is due in June of this year, is to add curb extensions at the intersections, sidewalk widening near the intersections and bus stop areas, enhance the intersection lighting, and improve flashers at Ortega and Yanonali intersections. So to repeat, these are the items that we are proposing to apply for in red. The areas in yellow will be maintained, but the major work will happen near the intersections. At this time, we do not know when funding will be available to widen the sidewalks in the middle of the blocks. This is an example as far as when we look for safer crossings is to include high visibility markings, as you see in this photo on the left. And then at the Ortega and Yanonali intersections is to also introduce an overhead flasher. There are currently rapid flashing beacons at both of those intersections. And this would add an overhead flasher as well to those intersections. And then we'd also add lighting again at all the intersections between Quinientos and Canon Perdido streets. So this aerial image here just shows the existing lighting and what the lighting area that it covers by those lights. And we're proposing again to have lighting at all legs of the intersection. And then also we would have some curb realignments at the intersections. Again, this would help with the sight and visibility at the intersections. And it would allow for more room for the existing bus stop locations here. As you can see, this is just one of the existing bus stop locations, but there's not a lot of room in this area. There, a lot of the bus stops feel pretty cramped and narrow. So widening out the curb will allow for more room at those locations. With that, I would like to now pass it off to Derek Bailey, our city traffic engineer, to go over each of the proposed intersection improvements in a little bit more detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Could we go to the next slide, please?
Yep.
Great, thanks. I'm going to go fairly quickly through these layouts. It's actually a lot to digest, and it can be difficult to fully understand what's going on just based on what's going on the computer screen here. So I'd really encourage you, if you have time, to join us on Saturday. We're going to have full printouts of the entire corridor, so you can take a better look of what's going on in more detail, or go to our website. Those same printouts will be available on our website too. But just at a really high level at Canon Perdido Street, no changes other than new lighting. The way the lighting exists right now is the lights hang over Milpas Street. So the Milpas Street approaches are well lit, but the side streets are not so well lit. So those yellow dots that are on the screen, those are new lights. The orange ones that hang over Milpas, those are the existing lights, and those won't change. So that'll be new, safe lighting for the intersection. Next slide, please. De La Guerra Street, similar to Canon Perdido, just new lighting, and we would replace the ADA access ramps with the paving project, and as well any sidewalk repair that's needed in the area. Next slide. Okay, so this is Ortega Street, and left is to the north and right is to the south. So on the left side of the screen, that's the existing median island shown in green. So that's existing. This was our one of our first flasher locations in the city, this one in Yanonali Street. And so we've learned a lot since then, and we've learned how to do these intersections better. One of the things we've noticed is that even though the crosswalk is on the north side of the street, we still see pedestrians using the south side crosswalk. So this project, we would add a second median island and just make sure that there's a crosswalk on both sides, no matter which side pedestrians want to use. As well, there is new lighting that's going to be on the side streets as well. There is a development proposed on the northwest corner. And if, depending on how that moves forward, we'll have to coordinate with them as well. Next slide, please. So Coda Street, this is where the more major intersection work and sidewalk widening happens. You can see the dark gray areas are where the sidewalks will be widened. So that's generally in the red curbed areas at the ends of the block. There'll also be new lighting over the side street over Coda. And as well, the bus stop on the southwest corner next to the tire shop. That's where the sidewalk will be widened by 6 feet. So that bus stop area will be nice and comfortable. And during the design process, we'd really like to work with MTD to make sure we can get bus shelters incorporated at all the stops along Milpas Street, if there are some within any. And next slide to Haley Street. So the north side, the northeast and northwest corners, so in front of the Jack in the Box and then across the street, that's where the sidewalk widening will be in dark gray. The south side of the intersection, that'll just be sidewalk repair. That's already a narrow, narrowed part of the street right there. So that would just be sidewalk repair and then new lighting on the side street approaches. Next slide. And Gutierrez Street, all 4 corners would be widened, including the bus stop on the northwest corner across from the 7-Eleven and new lighting. Next slide. Montecito Street, all 4 corners would be widened and new lighting. Yanonali Street would be next. Yeah, and again, all 4 corners would be widened. And as Jessica mentioned, this is where the mast arm mounted overhead flashers will be installed as well. So, and new lighting on the side street approaches. Mason Street, this would have the most sidewalk widening. That's where there's 2 very busy bus stops. So all 4 corners will get widened, especially those 2 corners with the bus stops, and additional lighting in the area as well. Next slide. And lastly, at Quinientos Street, just on the north side of the street, that's the only place we have room. So the northeast and northwest corners will get wider sidewalks. And there is lighting on all 4 corners out there, but we would retrofit them with LED lights that provide better crosswalk lighting. So that'll be a safety improvement as well. And again, I know that's a lot to digest, but it'd be great to see as many people as we can on Saturday at the Franklin Center, or go to our website. And if you have any questions, feel free to email anyone on the team and we'll be happy to get back to you. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jessica.
Yes, thank you, Derek. So as discussed, what was shown tonight, a ballpark for the improvements would cost about $10 million. Another way to increase chances of project funding is for city contributions or matching funding. When council starts to discuss the budget in early spring, we plan on requesting additional matching funds towards this grant application. In the past, the city has contributed a 1% match for the various applications we've applied for in the past. And that would give us 1 point, again, on the scoring rubric for the grant. What we saw at the last cycle, as I've mentioned, every cycle gets more and more competitive. And that was sort of the breaking point of which projects got funded and which projects did not. So matching funding does become very important to ensure that receiving grant funds. So that will be a conversation we'll need to have with council. Of course, council before them in their budgeting has to look at all city and infrastructure projects. And so it's not an easy decision for them based upon the limited funds we do have at the city. So how can you as the Eastside residents continue to stay involved in this process? It would be to participate in upcoming city council budget hearings. And then also to help us with additional support letters for the proposed improvements. For the last application, we did receive support for the school district, as this is a route for many Eastside residents going to junior high or high school to have to cross Milpas Street at some point to get to the high school or junior high. And then we also received letters of support from our regional transportation partners, County Public Health, MTD, the Coalition of Sustainable Transportation. But we encouraged more letters again from our residents and business community. So if you have any additional feedback beyond tonight or follow-up questions, feel free to email me. My email address is listed below. Again, we'd love to hear from you. And again, as Mr. Bailey mentioned, we will be out in front of the Franklin Center on this Saturday from 10 to noon. Showing maps of the entire corridor, and feel free to come by, let your neighbors know or the neighboring businesses to again check out what is being proposed. Again, for the rest of tonight's webinar, thank you for joining us tonight. Feel free to use the question and answer button to ask any questions or provide comments. Or alternatively, you can raise your hand as well to ask a question. And thank you so much for attending tonight's webinar. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chelsea Swanson, who will go ahead and read any questions or comments you may have.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm not seeing any comments in the Q&A yet, but I'm seeing a few hands raised. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute. The first person is Anthony Dalbello.
Yes, I'm here. I'd like to ask Derek, how many parking spaces will be removed or eliminated?
We haven't tallied that for tonight. If we can get your contact information, though, I'd be happy to get back to you. It's this plan is much less than there were with the previous plan. I forget that number off the top of my head too, but I think it'll be very minimal. Most of the sidewalk widening will happen within the red curved areas.
Well, where you have the sidewalk increasing there to 6 feet, and you have the bus, how's that going to work? Where you have bus stops where you have the increasing the sidewalks?
Yes, so most of us have driven up Milpas before and behind a bus, and when a bus pulls over, you can probably remember that the bus, you can't pass the bus in the same lane unless you have a really small car. So that bus stop will get pushed out a little, so the bus will get take up a little bit more of that traffic lane. So the bus stops will stay in the same location. It's just that with the challenges there already is passing the bus, the lane effectively becomes impassable when a bus pulls over. Widening the bus stop or the sidewalk next to the bus stop won't have any negative effects on traffic.
Okay, the other concern I have on Milpas Street is the city is not doing a very good job of curing, taking care of those trees. And the sidewalk you say have to be widened is because of the girth of the trees. Maybe some consideration should be taken to remove some of those trees so that you don't have to widen the sidewalk.
That is very insightful and gets to the crux of our challenge here. For those of you that were able to attend our workshops back in 2019 and 20, there was a pretty thorough community discussion over those trees. It's kind of a love-hate relationship with those trees. The canopy is beautiful, but the trees take up a lot of room. And the trees were, and you're right, the trees were never intended to grow that large. Really aggressive pruning when the trees were young, half a century ago, would have created more of a lollipop shape with those trees. But unfortunately, we have trees that are too large now. When it comes time to do the paving project, and hopefully we get funding to do the intersections and the sidewalk repair, we're going to have to go out with the city arborist tree by tree, inspecting these. There are some trees along the corridor that are declining in health, and some trees are unlikely to survive aggressive sidewalk repair either. So those trees will likely be candidates for removal. As far as a full scale removal, one thing we heard from everybody last time is that getting rid of the canopy all at once is not desirable either. But if we can start introducing new trees that fit within these tree wells, we can gradually start bringing up a new canopy as the ficus trees are replaced.
Can you repeat, please, what time you people are going to be at the Franklin Center?
We'll be there from 10 a.m. till noon on Saturday.
Okay. I will be there.
Excellent.
Great. Chelsea, I believe you're muted. If you want to go ahead and take
Thank
the
you,
next
Jessica.
question.
Yes, the next person that I'm going to unmute, I believe Jesse is the name.
Yeah, that's Jesse. Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Jesse.
My question is well, if you start removing a lot of those big trees, you're really gonna upset all the tree huggers. So my question is, a lot of these trees have tore up a lot of the sidewalks. Yeah, there's a huge one that's got that buckled up. So maybe you would take in consideration maybe working around the tree, but I don't know. I guess you guys would have to talk to your arborist like you guys already talked about. So my concern was the trees and the sidewalks.
Yes, thank you for your comment, Jesse. We were definitely, we've had several walks before with the city arborist, and if we were to receive grant funding for the project again, we'd be taking a closer look at all the existing trees. There's a couple or a few right at the intersections for sightline visibility that may need removal, but again, that's all a discussion that we need to have through the design process. Again, if we did have to remove a tree, we would be planting back a more appropriate street tree moving forward. But as Mr. Bailey mentioned, this is not to remove all the trees along the corridor. It is very important part of our urban forest, and important to have also shade and amenities as you walk along Milpas.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Jose Gallegos.
Good evening. Yes, those sidewalks are very, very narrow. That's for sure. I mean, I grew up over there in the Milpas area, back in the 60s when I was a kid. And yeah, when you're a little kid, well, you think everything is big and wide, but once you get older, you just start to realize, well, these two sidewalks are not as wide as you think that you thought they were. Yeah, and one of my main concerns about these sidewalks, they need to be smoothed out. They gotta, because you, like this one photo, you have this gentleman, I guess he's got a walker or something like that. It could be problematic for those with physical disabilities if they're using walkers, canes, walking sticks. I myself use a stacked walking stick. And those with wheelchairs, especially the electric type, they can get stuck or wedged, and it'd be very difficult to get out of a situation. I have not heard or seen anything like that, but that's a possibility, especially there on the 400 block of Milpas, of North Milpas. Those sidewalks right there on both sides of the street are really, really bad. And then in front of Pat Liquor Store, you have these cobblestones. And then on the 500 block of North Memphis, you have cobblestones there, and I think there might be cobblestone sidewalk at Jack in the Box. Those are very, very dangerous. I myself have came very close to slipping or tripping the cobblestones on State Street, because especially when it rains, those sidewalks with the cobblestones, they can get very slippery, really slippery. As yeah, you got to remove those cobblestone sidewalks. Yeah, it might work somewhere in Europe or something like that, but it doesn't work here. Also, as far as buses are concerned, because I do take the bus over there from Milpas area, and the one thing that I noticed on West Cabrillo Boulevard, kind of like right across from East Beach there's like a turn in for the city bus. When that was put in, I don't know. But I think that would be a good idea to have like a turn, for a bus to turn into, and that way it'd be safe for traffic, for pedestrians, and then once it's safe and clear, then the bus can pull out. I think that would be a good idea, and I also like the idea of having LED lights there at the main intersections there. So, but yeah, and trees, yeah, those trees need to go down. Maybe do a few every other year or so, and plant newer trees, and let them grow to a certain point, and then have the city trim them when they need to be trimmed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to respond to your comments about the cobblestone textured sidewalks, like around the Haley intersection, especially in that area is where there's quite a bit of it. I think from staff's perspective, we would like to replace that with more of a standard sidewalk as well. Any project that we do, we're going to be taking to the city's architectural board of review, so they might have some comments on aesthetic elements, just to make sure it looks good and is appropriate for the neighborhood. But I hear what you're saying 100% about just the walkability there.
Thanks, Derek. We do have a question in the Q&A, and I'll just go ahead. It says, thanks for this meeting. Since this is primarily a pedestrian focused safety project, will or can the new ADA ramps at intersections be designed for a perpendicular approach straight into the crosswalk rather than a diagonal entry into the street to follow recent best practice public right-of-way accessibility guidelines? Pricier, yes, but a safer experience for wheelchair users. Could that justify a more competitive funding request along with local leveraging?
I'll take that one. Yes, and the nice thing about widening sidewalks is it gives you more space. What the person is asking the question is, can you split the ramps up so that it's two ramps effectively that point into each of the crosswalks? A lot of our downtown crosswalks or corner ramps, for example, don't have a lot of width, and we can't squeeze those ramps in between the existing traffic signal poles. But out here, we would definitely have an opportunity to do something like that. And yes, that would just make the pedestrians feel that much more comfortable on Milpas Street. I don't think it's going to make necessarily make us any more competitive in the grant applications, but it's definitely something we would want to incorporate into the project.
Great, thanks, Derek. I see a couple more hands raised. So next up, we have Natalia. Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this presentation. I just wanted to get a little bit more clarity on the state when they refused this project a couple of years ago, when they stated it was not transformative enough. I mean, I know what that means, but can you give or expand on that, Mr. Derek Bailey or anybody here?
Yeah, I'd be happy to respond to that.
Thank you.
So $27 million price tag it's a big ask, and it was one of the larger applications that the state received. And so when they're looking at other applications that they received in that same ballpark, the streets and the applications that these other agencies were putting forth were not only widening sidewalks, but also providing like really fancy bike lanes and that sort of thing with it. So when they looked at our project and $27 million, and a lot of it was going into sidewalk repair and kind of dealing with the trees that the city planted many years ago, it just wasn't transforming the corridor the same way that some of the other applications were. It's not that it was a bad project. We scored 80 out of 100, which is still, I think, in the top third, but just compared to the ones that actually got funded, it wasn't as quote unquote transformative as the other ones. So as Jessica mentioned, it's an ultra competitive program, and in order to make us competitive, and we would like to attract as much funding as we can to this corridor to make improvements. Their advice was just to drop it down to somewhere in the $10 million range, and we'll do as much as we can for that much money.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. The next person who's going to speak is Naomi. Naomi, go ahead.
Oh, hi. Hi. Well, a lot of this looks very good. You know, I live on Aliso Street, so I'm always walking on Milpas. But there's one issue of safety, I think, which really hasn't been addressed. I often take the bus, and I get off the bus at, so it's the bus stop you talked about. You talked about one of the bus stops at Coda and Milpas. And then I have to cross Milpas. And that's still a dangerous crossing, because the cars are making their right turns. They're not looking for pedestrians, you know, and I'm very nervous. And sometimes, you know, I wait until I make sure that I catch the driver's eye. But I don't think that just, you talked about enhanced crosswalks, that maybe that will help, but I don't think that's enough. Anyway, that's my concern. And I have a similar concern for the bus stop. There's a bus stop on Haley, almost at Milpas, which is the same problem, that the cars are looking at cars. They're not looking for pedestrians. So, and maybe there should be some signage or something, I don't know, something to make them aware that there are pedestrians crossing. So that's my concern.
Thanks. Those are really good comments. A couple of things that will be better with this plan is the high visibility crosswalks that Jessica mentioned. Those are the ladder style crosswalks. When we're repaving roads now, we're using a much more durable material, so it doesn't wear away the same way that paint does. Everything on Milpas is paint, so after it's repaved, those markings will be high quality and they won't get worn away nearly as quickly. With the sidewalk widening, it's going to narrow that crossing right now it's about 64 feet to cross Milpas Street, and this will narrow it to about 56. It's still a wider crossing, but it means that you're not out in the street as long as you were. One of the things we talked about with the community back in 2019 was turn arrows. And in order to make like what we call exclusive phasing for pedestrians, we can do things like turn arrows, but it also adds some inefficiencies to the intersection. And so what we heard from the community is everybody generally liked the way the traffic signals operated out there and didn't want us to change. So yeah, but signs are a good idea too. So we'll
Oh, but it's true. You could have turn arrows.
there could
That
be,
would
but the trade-off with turn arrows is that it with turn lanes, and when you have a turn arrow, like a left turn lane and a left turn arrow, for example, most left turn lanes only have a single lane. And when you have a green arrow, it's taking green time away from the other approach. And that approach typically has 2 lanes. So it's more efficient to not have turn arrows, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. We're talking about safety though, you know.
You're right. And yeah, when the
And I wanted, and on the issue of safety, I'm not worried about the time so much in the intersection. It's the immediate, because once I get past the middle of the street, I feel okay. People coming from the up Milpas will see me. It's the people turning that I'm worried about.
got it. Okay.
That's all, because they're looking at traffic and they're looking at cars. They're not looking at me. You know, that's my.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay, so that was it. That was that was my big concern.
Okay. No, we appreciate your comments.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'm going to allow or unmute Barry. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Thanks, Team Transportation. We appreciate the ability to take a look at these plans and see what's in the works. Just supplementing what Miss Naomi had been talking about, and in the interest of while turn arrows, turn only arrows may not necessarily be in the cards. Another way, could there be consideration for another way to implement some of the things that have been implemented in other parts of the city? And I'm not going to get too techie here, but like, for example, the lead pedestrian interval where the walk sign activates a few seconds before the motorist can go, giving the pedestrian a chance to cross ahead of the turning traffic. And also, I know that, for example, at the corner of Alomar and State, we have an LED light that when a pedestrian presses the button, there's a big yield to pedestrians sign that gets illuminated. So perhaps maybe some of those things potentially could be considered to add it to the application, which, who knows, maybe could actually make the project a little more transformative, in quotes. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. Yeah, at this point, I think we're open to exploring all avenues. The leading pedestrian interval has worked well at a few other intersections in the city. And I think we're open to studying it for Milpas as well.
Thanks, Derek. There is a comment in the Q&A just in agreement with the previous suggestion for not having diagonal ramps. And the comment is, I recently suffered a bad fall tripping over the edge of a diagonal ramp while walking in low light conditions. I had not expected that ledge at the edge of the ramp. I would expect a cleaner approach while crossing the street. And I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A, so go ahead and if you have any more questions, enter them in the Q&A or go ahead and raise your hand and we'll unmute you.
Thank you for all the questions so far. They've been really great. Really appreciate it and appreciate the dialogue.
If I can ask a question to everybody in the audience, I know this is a little unusual, but kind of an informal poll. That leading pedestrian interval, if people are unfamiliar with that, as Barry, I think that was Barry that asked that, mentioned, the walk light turns on a few seconds early. I think one of the most recognizable ones we have in the city is at State and Gutierrez. So if you're driving from Milpas Street towards State Street along Gutierrez and you get to State Street and you are waiting at a red light, the walk lights turn on a few seconds early and then the light turns green. And what that does is allows pedestrians to take 2 or 3 steps into the crosswalk before traffic can start. And that just gets pedestrians a little bit further out into drivers' visibility area. And it's worked really well at State and Gutierrez. We're quite happy with it. The trade-off is that there is a few seconds less green time for the side street. So for example, how that would work on Milpas Street is if you're waiting at a red light on Coda Street, for example, at Milpas, and there's a leading pedestrian interval, the walk light would turn on a few seconds early, and then you'd get a green light. The downside to that is it can add a little bit of congestion to the side streets, but it does add that extra element of safety for pedestrians. And just curious what people think of that, and if it seems to be a good trade-off. Like I said, it's worked really well at a couple other intersections in the city.
And Mitchell, Torina, and San Andres.
Yes, that's
Another
and then
location.
yeah.
So if you ever haven't tried them, then we would encourage you to go out and experience those. And yeah, State and Gutierrez would be a good one because it's there's a lot of movements to that traffic signal going on. That would be fairly similar conditions to Milpas Street.
I do see one comment in response to your question, Derek. The comment is the green light is too short, especially at Santa Barbara Junior High start time and dismissal time. We need to remedy left turning cars impeding the flow of straight flowing traffic. And could a left turn lane be created heading east or west?
Yep, so that's getting right to the point of the trade-off that I was talking about. So I'm assuming they're asking about Coda Street.
Yeah, sorry, I'll clarify. This is for Coda Street.
Okay, yeah, Coda Street coming out of the east side, so going westbound towards the junior high, that approach is not wide enough to squeeze in a left turn lane. So the green time that we give to Coda Street, comes at the expense of Milpas Street. And right at the beginning of school for the junior high or the high school, it's busy on both approaches. There are, literally thousands of people trying to get to the same place at the same time. So to make the light longer on Coda means you're making it shorter for Milpas, and Milpas is quite congested as well. So the trade-off with that leading pedestrian interval is it would make the Coda light, green light, a few seconds shorter. So that's the trade-off that I was talking about. It adds that extra element of comfort and safety for pedestrians, but it does have that trade-off of less green time for vehicles.
Thanks, Derek. I do see a hand raised again. Barry, go ahead.
I again just wanted to share that this is great conversation about the leading pedestrian interval, and another example of where that happens is at De La Guerra and Santa Barbara Street, also where new developments that have been placed there. One thing that's interesting though is that for example, the Yanonali, the Gutierrez State Street intersection really works well because cars that want to turn left, they have to wait for that green light, of course, before they can make that maneuver. However, if we were talking about Coda and Milpas Street, would we then need to consider introducing a no turn on red situation, because otherwise right turn people at Big Brand Tire are gonna perhaps might still, it's a red light and they make a right anyway. So I'm not sure if the leading pedestrian interval, how much that could mitigate things without having to think about further measures to mitigate that. Just wanted to share that thought. Devil's advocate.
Thank you, Barry. Then there is a comment about this topic in the Q&A, and it says the leading pedestrian interval sounds good, but people on Gutierrez can't proceed without the light turning green. At Coda Street, they can turn right at Milpas after stopping at a red light. This is the danger. Perhaps it should be no right turn on red. I don't know if you have any comments about that, Derek.
Yeah, it's something we can consider as well. Again, it's a trade-off with traffic capacity and safety capacity. We should always favor safety, but the reality is the more restrictions that we place at an intersection, it can add to congestion, and that can increase people's frustration and further some of the bad behaviors that are going on out there. So not saying it's not a good idea, it's just a consideration and some of the things that we have to balance.
Thanks, Derek. Go ahead and keep adding your questions if you have any in the Q&A, or raise your hand. I'm not seeing any new hands raised or new questions.
Okay, well, with that, thank you again for joining us. If you had any follow-up questions, feel free to shoot us an email, jgrant@santabarbaraca.gov. And of course, we'd love to see you all in person this Saturday from 10 to noon. Again, feel free to talk with your neighbors or the neighboring businesses to let them know about the continued workshop on Saturday. We'd love to see you all. So with that, good evening, everyone.